Princess Vayara sat alone in the great hall of the Scifi imperial court, her delicate, silver-blue hands resting on the cold, polished stone table. The massive chamber, once a place where rulers and warriors made history, now felt like a prison. She could feel their eyes on her, nobles, warriors, and diplomats from every corner of the empire. They whispered among themselves, their voices full of mockery and disdain. The crippled princess, a weakling unfit for the throne. She should have been abandoned at birth. Vayara clenched her fists beneath the table. She had heard these words since childhood, but today they cut deeper than ever. Today was the official courtship ceremony, where noble houses from across the empire gathered to arrange powerful alliances through marriage. Every prince, every highborn warrior, had the chance to claim her hand, and every single one of them had rejected her. One by one, the suitors had stepped forward, looked at her fragile form, and turned away. Even the lowest-ranking noble refused to marry a Scifi without strength. Now, the final suitor, Prince Seltor, the emperor's favored son, stood before her. He was tall, strong, his deep violet armor gleaming under the grand chandeliers. He looked down at her with cold, golden eyes. "I will not take a broken wife," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "The empire needs strength, not weakness." Laughter rippled through the hall. Vayara felt her face burn with shame. She wanted to shout, to fight, to prove she was more than they believed, but she could not change the truth. Her body was weak. She was not a warrior. The emperor, her own father, remained silent. His face showed no emotion, as if she were not even his daughter. Soon, she would be exiled to Vekrosnine, a barren moon where disgraced nobles were sent to be forgotten. But before the ceremony could be declared over, a voice echoed through the hall. "I will take her." The room fell silent. Vayara turned her head, expecting another cruel joke. But the voice did not belong to a Scifi noble. It belonged to a human. Standing at the edge of the grand hall was Captain Darius Holt. He was tall, his dark Terran uniform worn from years of battle, a scar running across his cheek. His steel-gray eyes held no mockery, no pity, only certainty. Murmurs spread through the crowd. A human. Humans were nothing but mercenaries, wanderers without an empire. What right did he have to speak here? Prince Seltor's face twisted in disgust. "You dare speak in the court of the Scifi?" He spat. "She is a princess of the empire. A human is unworthy of her." Darius smirked. "Strange. I thought the problem was that no one wanted her. And yet, here I stand, asking for her hand." Vayara could not believe what she was hearing. No one had ever spoken for her. No one had ever chosen her. Was this some kind of trick? She lifted her chin and met Darius's gaze. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The human captain smiled, stepping forward. "Because I see more than what these fools see. I see a mind sharper than any blade. I see a future worth fighting for. I see a woman who deserves better than to be thrown away." The nobles gasped. Even the emperor's eyes narrowed slightly. Prince Seltor laughed bitterly. "You speak as if you could protect her, a single human against the empire." Darius's smile never wavered. "I may be just one man," he said, "but I'm not afraid of your empire." Silence. Vayara's heart pounded. Was this madness, or was this fate? For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her, not as a burden, but as a partner. And she had a decision to make. The great hall of the Scifi imperial court remained silent. Every noble, every warrior, every dignitary present stared in shock at the human who had dared to speak. Princess Vayara sat frozen in place, her delicate silver-blue fingers gripping the edge of the table. Had she heard correctly? A human had asked for her hand in marriage. Captain Darius Holt stood tall, his Terran uniform worn from years of battle, his steel-gray eyes steady. He had no fear, no hesitation. He had just challenged the might of the Scifi Empire with nothing but his words. Then came the laughter. It started with a chuckle from one noble, then spread like wildfire through the court. Warriors clutched their sides, nobles covered their mouths, their shoulders shaking. Even the emperor, silent until now, allowed himself a small, cold smile. Prince Zeltor, heir to the empire, took a step forward, his violet armor gleaming under the hall's golden lights. His golden eyes burned with contempt. "A human," he sneered. "You think you can claim a princess of the Scifi Empire? You are nothing. A mercenary. A wanderer. You are not worthy to stand before us, let alone take her as your wife." Darius tilted his head, unimpressed. "Strange. I thought the problem was that no one else wanted her. And yet, here I am." The laughter stopped. Vayara's breath caught in her throat. The way he said it, it wasn't mockery, it wasn't pity. It was truth. Cold, simple truth. Zeltor's jaw clenched. "You insult the Empire." Darius smirked. "I speak the truth, something that seems rare in this room." He turned to face Vayara, his expression softening. "Princess, I don't care what these people think of you. I see someone who deserves better than to be thrown away like a broken tool." Her heart pounded. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her like this. Zeltor's hand went to the blade at his side. "You dare insult the honor of the Xilari. If you think yourself worthy, then prove it." Gasps filled the chamber. A challenge. Darius sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Right, I should have seen this coming." He turned to the emperor, his voice calm. "If I win, I take the princess as my wife. No more arguments." The emperor's piercing gaze locked onto him. He did not speak immediately. Then, with a nod, he said, "Agreed." Vayara's breath hitched. "Father, you can't." "It is the way of our people," the emperor said simply. "Strength decides fate." Vayara wanted to protest. Darius was human. No matter how confident he looked, he couldn't win against Zeltor, a warrior trained since birth. And yet, Darius only smiled. "Fine," he said. "Let's get this over with." The duel begins. The court moved to the grand arena, a massive chamber where warriors fought to prove their worth. It was a place of blood, of glory. Vayara sat in the royal box, her hands trembling. She had barely spoken to this human, yet now he was risking his life for her. Zeltor stood in the center of the arena, drawing his energy blade, a weapon that hummed with violet plasma. He was taller, stronger, and armed with superior technology. Darius, in contrast, wore no armor, carried no auxiliary weapon. He only had a simple Terran combat knife strapped to his side. "This will be over quickly," Zeltor sneered. Darius smirked. "I was hoping you'd say that." The battle began. Zeltor lunged, his energy blade slicing through the air with terrifying speed. The crowd roared, expecting the fight to end in seconds. But Darius was already moving. With inhuman reflexes, he dodged the strike by a hair's breadth. The blade sizzled past his ear. He ducked, rolled, and before Zeltor could recover, Darius was behind him. A sharp kick to the back of the knee sent the prince tumbling. The crowd gasped. No one had ever made Zeltor stumble. Snarling, the prince attacked again, his strikes becoming wilder, angrier. Darius dodged each one, reading his opponent like a book. Vayara's eyes widened. She had seen countless duels, but this was different. Darius didn't fight like a brute. He was precise, calculated. Every movement was controlled, every step perfectly timed. And then, he struck. In the blink of an eye, Darius sidestepped, grabbing Zeltor's wrist. With a single brutal twist, he disarmed the prince, sending the energy blade clattering to the floor. Silence. Zeltor's eyes went wide in shock. Before he could react, Darius pressed his combat knife against the prince's throat. The duel was over. The arena was deathly quiet. Slowly, Darius leaned in, whispering for only Exceltor to hear. "Never assume a human is weak," he said. "It'll be the last mistake you ever make." Zeltor swallowed hard. He had been defeated. Darius turned to the Emperor, sheathing his knife. "I believe I won." The Emperor studied him for a long moment. Then, to the shock of all, he gave a slow nod. "The duel is decided. The human has won." The crowd erupted into chaos. Some shouted in outrage, others in disbelief. But the law was the law. Darius turned to Vayara, his expression softer now. He extended a hand. "So, Princess, will you still have me?" Vayara looked at his outstretched hand, at the man who had just fought for her, who had seen value in her when no one else had. For the first time in her life, she felt chosen. She placed her hand in his, and the empire would never be the same again. The corridors of the imperial palace echoed with whispers and murmurs. A human had not only dared to stand in the auxiliary court, but had also defeated Prince Zeltor in combat. It was a moment that would be remembered for generations, a moment that many wished had never happened. Princess Vayara stood in her chambers, staring at her reflection in the tall, curved mirror. Her silver-blue skin shimmered under the dim light, but for the first time in her life, she did not see a fragile, broken princess. She saw a woman whose fate had changed. The marriage contract had been signed. She was now bound to Captain Darius Holt, a human mercenary. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. "Enter," she said. Darius stepped in, his uniform slightly rumpled from the duel. His expression was calm, as always, but there was something behind his eyes. Concern, maybe even worry. "You're thinking about running, aren't you?" he said with a smirk. Vayara crossed her arms. "Should I?" He chuckled. "I wouldn't blame you. But if you do, at least let me know so I don't waste my time packing." She sighed, turning away. "You don't understand, Darius. You humiliated the prince in front of the empire. They will not let this go." "Good," he said casually. "I enjoy a challenge." She turned sharply. "You don't understand how dangerous they are." Darius met her gaze, his expression turning serious. "I understand more than you think. That's why we need to leave. Tonight." Vayara's breath caught. "Leave? You think they'll just let us go?" he said. "They'll never accept me as your husband, and they won't accept you choosing the human over your own kind. The Emperor might honor the duel, but Exceltor, he'll want revenge. I can already hear his men sharpening their blades." A cold dread settled in Vayara's chest. She knew Darius was right. At that moment, the palace alarms blared. Darius swore under his breath. "Looks like they're not even waiting until morning." The escape begins. The palace corridors were a maze of twisting metal halls, glowing with crimson morning lights. Armed guards rushed in every direction, shouting orders. Darius grabbed Vayara's wrist. "Stay close to me." She didn't resist. They moved swiftly, avoiding the main corridors. Vayara's mind raced. Who had sounded the alarm? Had Zeltor acted so quickly? Her question was answered when they turned a corner and came face to face with a squad of royal guards. "Princess Vayara," the lead guard said, his face hidden beneath a dark helmet. "By order of Prince Zeltor, you are to be placed under protective custody. The human is to be executed." Darius sighed. "I was hoping for a peaceful exit, but fine." Before the guards could react, he moved. Vayara barely had time to process what happened. One moment, Darius was beside her. The next, he was a blur of motion. He slammed his fist into the nearest guard's helmet, sending him crashing against the wall. A second guard swung his energy staff, but Darius ducked, twisting the weapon out of his hands before striking him with the blunt end. Within seconds, the entire squad lay on the ground, groaning in pain. Vayara stared. "How?" Darius grinned. "Terran Special Forces training. We don't just fight. We finish fights." She didn't argue. "Then let's finish this escape." Fire in the void. They reached the royal hangar. where Darius's ship, the Iron Vow, was docked. The sleek Terran vessel hummed with energy, its engines primed for takeoff. But standing between them and freedom was Prince Xeltor himself. The prince stood at the foot of the ship's loading ramp, flanked by elite warriors. His golden eyes burned with fury. "You have dishonored me, human." His voice was cold as ice. "You will not leave this place alive." Darius stepped forward, unfazed. "I already beat you once, Prince. Are you really that eager to lose again?" Xeltor bared his teeth. "You didn't fight me at my full strength. I will correct that mistake now." He lunged, faster than before. His energy blade ignited in a flash of violet light. Darius dodged, but this time, Xeltor was prepared. His blade carved through the air, forcing Darius to block with his combat knife. Sparks flew as the two clashed, their movements a deadly dance of speed and precision. Vayara watched in horror. Darius was fast, but Xeltor was a warrior bred for battle. He wouldn't hold back this time. Darius gritted his teeth as Xeltor's attacks grew fiercer. One strike slashed across his shoulder, burning through his uniform. He staggered back, clutching the wound. Xeltor smirked. "You are skilled, but you are only human." Darius wiped the blood from his arm. "And that's why I always have a backup plan." He whistled sharply. Above them, the Iron Vow's weapons roared to life. The ship's auto-turrets locked onto Xeltor's warriors and fired, forcing them to scatter. In the chaos, Darius kicked Xeltor backward and grabbed Vayara's hand. "Time to go," he shouted. They sprinted up the ramp as the ship's engines roared. The Iron Vow lifted off, blasting out of the hangar just as the prince's forces fired after them. Inside the cockpit, Darius threw himself into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. "Hold on, princess." The ship rocketed into space, breaking through the planet's orbit. But alarms blared again. Scifi warships were already in pursuit. Vayara gripped the chair beside him. "We won't outrun them." Darius smirked. "We're not running. We're going straight through." Before she could ask what he meant, he pushed the ship into a dive, directly toward an asteroid field. The auxiliary ships hesitated. Darius grinned. "Let's see if they can keep up." And with that, the Iron Vow disappeared into the chaos of the asteroids, leaving the Empire behind. For the first time in her life, Vayara was truly free. The Iron Vow weaved through the asteroid field like a ghost, dodging massive chunks of rock with impossible precision. The auxiliary warships hesitated at the edge of the field, their captains unwilling to risk their expensive vessels in such dangerous terrain. Inside the cockpit, Darius Holt smirked as he guided the ship through a narrow gap between two colliding asteroids. "Looks like they're not as brave as they pretend to be." Princess Vayara, sitting beside him, let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was reckless," she said, gripping the seat's armrest. Darius shrugged. "Reckless is my specialty." Despite herself, Vayara smiled slightly. But her expression turned serious again as she looked at the scanner. "They'll keep hunting us. Xeltor will never stop." Darius leaned back in his seat, rubbing his chin. "Then we need allies." Vayara frowned. "Who would help us? The auxiliary empire controls most of this sector." Darius's smirk returned. "I know a guy." A meeting on the outpost. Hours later, the Iron Vow landed on Outpost 9, a lawless space station floating near the border of Scifi space. It was a place where criminals, bounty hunters, and smugglers gathered. A perfect place to disappear. As they stepped off the ship, Vayara's eyes widened at the chaos around them. Aliens of all shapes and sizes bartered, argued, and fought in the neon-lit marketplace. The smell of strange spices and fuel filled the air. "This place is," Vayara hesitated. "A dump," Darius offered. "I was going to say dangerous." Darius chuckled. "That too." They made their way through the crowded streets until they reached a dark, rusted building. Inside, A heavy-set man with cybernetic arms sat behind a bar, cleaning a glass. When he saw Darius, he grinned. Well, if it isn't Captain Holt. Last time you were here, you owed me money. Darius smirked. That was years ago. Roger, I thought we were past that. Roger chuckled. Not even close. His eyes flickered to Vayara. And who's this? Never thought I'd see a auxiliary princess walking around here. Vayara lifted her chin. You know who I am. Roger nodded. Everyone knows. Xeltor put a bounty on your head the moment you escaped. He leaned in, grinning. 50,000 credits. Vayara's blood ran cold. Darius tensed. We're not here to cause trouble. Roger, we need information. We need to disappear. Roger studied him, then sighed. Hiding from an empire isn't cheap, Darius. Darius pulled a small data chip from his pocket and tossed it onto the counter. This should cover it. Roger raised an eyebrow, inserting the chip into a scanner. A slow whistle escaped his lips. That's a lot of credits. Where'd you get this? Let's just say I did a job for someone important, Darius replied. Roger smirked. Fine, I'll help you. He glanced at Vayara. But be careful, princess. Even out here, there are people who'd sell you out in a second. Vayara nodded. I understand. Trouble finds them. As they left the bar, Darius pulled Vayara aside. We need to get off this station fast. Someone will recognize you sooner or later. Vayara nodded, but before they could move, a deep voice cut through the crowd. There she is. Darius turned sharply. A group of bounty hunters stood in their path, weapons drawn. Their leader, a reptilian alien with black scales and yellow eyes, grinned. The Empire's looking for you, princess, he hissed. And they're paying very well. Vayara's heart pounded. Darius sighed. You guys really don't want to do this. The bounty hunter chuckled. Oh, I think we do. Darius didn't wait for them to attack. He grabbed Vayara's wrist and pulled her down just as the first shot whizzed past her head. In one smooth motion, Darius drew his pistol and fired, hitting one of the hunters in the shoulder. The marketplace erupted into chaos as people ran for cover. The bounty hunters fired back, their energy blasts illuminating the dark street. Darius ducked behind a metal crate, pulling Vayara with him. Stay down. Vayara's pulse raced. I'm not useless, you know. Before Darius could respond, she grabbed a fallen blaster and fired at one of the hunters, forcing them back. Darius blinked. Then he grinned. Not bad, princess. More hunters arrived. They were outnumbered. Darius made a quick decision. We need to split up. Meet me at the ship. Vayara hesitated but nodded. She sprinted down a side alley while Darius charged into the fight, drawing their attention. Shots echoed through the marketplace as he disappeared into the chaos. A desperate escape. Vayara ran, her heart pounding. She darted through narrow streets, avoiding the hunters searching for her. Finally, she reached the Iron Vow. The ship's ramp was down, engines humming. She sprinted aboard and ran to the cockpit, her hands shaking as she activated the scanners. Darius, where are you? She whispered. Static. Then his voice crackled through. I'm on my way, but I got company. Through the ship's cameras, Vayara saw him. A dozen bounty hunters chasing him through the docking bay. Without thinking, she activated the ship's defensive turrets. As the hunters closed in on Darius, the ship's cannons roared to life. Blaster fire erupted, forcing the bounty hunters to dive for cover. Darius leaped onto the ramp, rolling inside just as the doors sealed shut. He landed beside her, breathing heavily. Nice timing. Vayara smirked. Told you I wasn't useless. Darius laughed. All right, let's get out of here before more show up. As the ship blasted off into space, Vayara exhaled. They had barely escaped. But something told her this was only the beginning. The Iron Vow soared through the darkness of space, its engines burning hot as it left Outpost 9 far behind. But even as the space station faded from view, Princess Vayara knew their troubles were far from over. She sat in the cockpit beside Darius, watching the scanner anxiously. "Are we being followed?" she asked. Darius, focused on the controls, glanced at the screen. "Not yet," he said, "but they will come. The bounty on your head is big enough to make anyone chase us." Vayara clenched her hands into fists. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to be hunted like some criminal." Darius smirked. "Welcome to my world, princess." She shot him a glare, but before she could reply, the ship's alarm blared. "Incoming vessels, DTE." Darius swore under his breath and checked the radar. 4 ships had just appeared behind them, moving fast. "Looks like someone found us," he muttered. Vayara's heart pounded. "Scifi ships." Darius shook his head. "No, these are bounty hunters." She exhaled in relief, only for Darius to chuckle. "Don't look so happy," he said. "They might be worse. A deadly pursuit." The bounty hunter ships moved quickly, their sleek, dark hulls cutting through space like blades. They spread out, blocking every escape route. A voice crackled over the ship's comms. "Attention, Iron Vow. You are harboring a high-value target. Surrender the princess, and we will let you live." Darius leaned forward and pressed the comm button. "How about this? You leave us alone, and I won't blast you into space dust." Silence. Then, wrong answer. The bounty hunters opened fire. Bright streaks of plasma shot past the Iron Vow, shaking the ship violently. The shields flared, barely holding against the barrage. "Darius," Vayara shouted as sparks flew from the control panels. "Hold on." He yelled back, jerking the controls hard. The ship spun sharply, dodging a missile that exploded just inches away. The cockpit lights flickered. The shield meter dropped to 40%. "This isn't good," Darius muttered. Vayara swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Darius's eyes darted over the controls. Then he grinned. "We use their greed against them." Before she could ask what he meant, he cut the ship's engines, the bait and the trap. For a moment, the Iron Vow drifted lifelessly in space. The bounty hunters hesitated. Then one of the ships moved closer. "Is their engine dead?" A voice crackled over the comms. Another responded. "Maybe they took a hit. Move in and confirm the kill." 2 of the bounty hunter ships advanced cautiously. Darius waited until they were just close enough. Then, he reactivated the thrusters at full power. The sudden burst of speed threw the Iron Vow upward, just as the bounty hunters opened fire. Their plasma shots missed, and instead hit their own allies. One bounty hunter ship exploded in a fiery blast. Vayara gasped. "That was brilliant." "I know," Darius said with a smirk, "but we're not done yet." The remaining ships were already correcting their positions, their weapons locking onto the Iron Vow again. Darius's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them, not with the damage they'd already taken. They needed to disappear. He scanned the star map. Then he saw it. A nebula field just a few light minutes away. "Hang on," he shouted, pushing the thrusters to their limit. The Iron Vow raced toward the nebula, with the bounty hunters close behind, vanishing into the storm. As they entered the nebula, the entire ship shook violently. The bright glow of the ion clouds illuminated the cockpit, and static crackled over the comms. "We can't stay here long," Vayara said, gripping the seat tightly. "The energy in this nebula will fry our systems." Darius nodded. "We just need to last longer than them." Behind them, the bounty hunters followed, but their ships were not built for this environment. One of the ships flew too close to an ion storm and was struck by a lightning arc. It exploded instantly. The other 2 hesitated. Darius seized the opportunity. "Divert all power to stealth systems." The ship's lights dimmed. The engines cooled. The Iron Vow vanished into the thick clouds. The remaining bounty hunters searched, their scanners flickering from the interference. After several tense moments, one of them cursed over the comms. We lost them. A few seconds later, the enemy ships turned and left the nebula. Inside the cockpit, Vayara let out a long breath. We did it. Darius leaned back, smirking. Told you I had a plan. She gave him a small smile. That was impressive. Yeah, I get that a lot. She rolled her eyes, but the relief was clear in her expression. Darius checked the systems. We took some hits, but we're still flying. We should find a safe place to land and make repairs. Vayara nodded. And then, Darius's expression darkened. Then we figure out how to end this hunt for good. She met his gaze. For the first time, she saw not just a mercenary, but someone willing to fight for her, no matter what. Maybe, just maybe, she had chosen the right person to trust. The iron vow drifted silently through the nebula, its hull glowing faintly from the energy storms crackling outside. Inside the ship, Darius Holt and Princess Vayara worked quickly to repair the damage from their recent battle with the bounty hunters. Vayara wiped sweat from her forehead, her hands covered in grease. This is harder than I expected, she muttered. Darius chuckled as he tightened a loose panel. Welcome to life outside our royal palace, princess. She shot him a glare, but there was no anger behind it, only exhaustion. Over the past few days, she had been through more danger than in her entire life. Yet, strangely, she didn't feel weak. She felt stronger. Darius leaned back, inspecting his work. All right, that should hold for now. But we can't stay here forever. The nebula is keeping us hidden. But if we don't move soon, our systems will start failing. Vayara nodded. Where do we go? Darius hesitated for a moment. Then he tapped a location on the star map. There's a planet not far from here, Velen 4. It's a desert world, mostly abandoned. I know someone there who might help us. Vayara raised an eyebrow. Another one of your old friends. Darius smirked. Something like that. A dangerous landing. Hours later, the iron vow entered the atmosphere of Velen 4. The planet stretched out below them, endless dunes of golden sand and jagged rock formations. A harsh wind howled across the landscape, kicking up violent dust storms. Darius gripped the controls. Hold on, landing might be rough. Vayara braced herself as the ship shook violently, buffeted by strong winds. The cockpit alarms blared as sand clogged the thrusters. Come on, don't fall apart on me now, Darius muttered. With a final jolt, the iron vow touched down on the desert surface. A cloud of dust rose around them before settling. Darius let out a breath. Not my smoothest landing, but we're alive. Vayara exhaled in relief. So, where's this friend of yours? Darius unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. Not far. There's an old trading post a few miles from here. If he's still around, he'll know what to do. Vayara followed him to the exit ramp. As it lowered, a blast of hot, dry air hit them. The sun blazed overhead, and the ground shimmered from the heat. This place is worse than I imagined, Vayara muttered. Darius grinned. You'll get used to it. Now, let's move. An old friend, or an enemy. After an hour of walking through the dunes, they'd reached the trading post, a collection of metal buildings half buried in the sand. A few battered ships were parked nearby, their owners nowhere in sight. Darius led the way into a dimly lit bar, where the air smelled of oil and spice. A few patrons glanced up, but quickly lost interest. At the far end of the room, a large, burly man with cybernetic eyes sat behind a counter, sipping a drink. Darius approached. Been a while, Kale. The man's mechanical eyes wavered as they focused on him. Then he grinned. Darius Holt. I thought you were dead. Darius smirked. Not yet. He gestured toward Vayara. We need your help. Kale leaned forward. Help, huh? That usually means trouble. What kind of trouble are we talking about? Vayara answered before Darius could. The Exilary Empire is hunting me. We need a way to disappear for good. Cal's eyebrows rose. A Xilari princess. That's a new one. He chuckled. You always find yourself in the worst situations. Holt. Darius shrugged. It's a gift. Cal studied them for a moment, then nodded. All right. I might have a way, but it won't be cheap. Darius crossed his arms. We can pay. Cal smirked. Then we have a deal. The betrayal. Cal led them to a hidden hangar, where an old but powerful-looking stealth ship sat waiting. This beauty can get you out of Xilari space undetected, Cal said. No tracking, no signal. It's like you never existed. Veyara's eyes widened in hope. That's perfect. Darius placed a hand on the ship's hull. How much? Cal smiled. 50,000 credits. Darius stiffened. That's robbery, Cal. Cal shrugged. You're desperate. Desperate people pay more. Before Darius could argue, Veyara stepped forward. We'll pay. Darius shot her a look, but she ignored him. If this gets us away from the Xilari Empire, it's worth it. Cal grinned. Smart girl. But just as they prepared to transfer the credits, the hangar doors slammed shut. Veyara's blood ran cold. What? Cal sighed. Sorry, kid. Business is business. From the shadows, Xilari soldiers emerged, their weapons raised. Darius immediately drew his blaster, but Cal was faster. He grabbed a nearby control pad and pressed a button. An electric shock surged through Darius's body. He collapsed to the ground, groaning in pain. Veyara screamed. You betrayed us. Cal smirked. Like I said, business. A tall figure stepped forward. The familiar, menacing shape of Commander Xeltor. His red eyes gleamed. You thought you could escape me, princess. Veyara's heart pounded in terror. They had been caught. Xeltor turned to his soldiers. Take them. Veyara struggled as the soldiers grabbed her arms, forcing her forward. She looked down at Darius, who was still fighting to move. Darius, she cried. He groaned, trying to lift himself up, but the stun blast had weakened him. Xeltor chuckled. Your little human can't save you now. As Veyara was dragged away, her mind raced. This wasn't over. Even in the face of betrayal, she would find a way to fight back. Princess Veyara struggled against the strong grip of the Xilari soldiers as they dragged her through the metal corridors of Cal's hidden hangar. Commander Xeltor walked ahead, his long cape flowing behind him. You should not have run, princess, Xeltor said without looking back. You belong to the Empire. You always will. Veyara clenched her jaw, refusing to answer. Her mind wasn't on the commander. It was on Darius. She had seen him fall, stunned by Cal's betrayal. She had seen the pain in his eyes as she was taken away. But she knew one thing for sure. Darius never gave up. And neither would she. Darius fights back. Inside the hangar, Darius Holt groaned as he pushed himself up from the floor. His body still burned from the electric shock, but he forced himself to move. Cal was standing by the control panel, watching the Xilari soldiers leave with Veyara. He didn't notice Darius stirring. You made a bad deal, Cal, Darius said, his voice rough. Cal turned, surprised. Still alive, huh? You always were stubborn. Darius lunged forward, grabbing a nearby metal rod and swinging it at Cal's head. Cal dodged, but Darius was faster. He followed up with a sharp punch to Cal's stomach, making the traitor double over in pain. You should have killed me when you had the chance, Darius growled. Cal reached for his gun, but Darius kicked it away. Then, with one final blow, he knocked Cal unconscious. Breathing heavily, Darius grabbed his blaster and sprinted toward the exit. He was going to get Veyara back. A princess's power. Veyara was taken to a Xilari transport ship, her hands locked in energy restraints. You are a prisoner of the Empire, Xeltor said, sitting across from her. You will return to the Xilari homeworld and be given to the High Council. Veyara met his gaze with cold defiance. And if I refuse? Zeltor smirked. Then you will learn what happens to traitors. For a moment, silence filled the ship. The engines rumbled as they prepared for liftoff. Then, boom! An explosion rocked the transport. The ship shook violently, and the alarms blared. What? Zeltor shouted. What's happening? The doors burst open, and a familiar figure stood in the entrance, blaster in hand. Darius. You forgot something, Commander, he said with a smirk. Your prisoner isn't going anywhere. Zeltor snarled. Kill him. The auxiliary soldiers opened fire, but Darius was already moving. He dove behind cover, firing shot after shot. 2 guards fell instantly. Veyara saw her chance. As the remaining soldiers aimed at Darius, she lifted her foot and kicked one in the knee, making him stumble. Then, using all her strength, she slammed her shoulder into another guard, knocking him off balance. Her restraints were still on, but she wasn't helpless. Darius saw what she was doing and grinned. Nice work, princess. He fired at the last guard, dropping him to the floor. Zeltor, furious, lunged at Veyara. Enough. But Veyara was ready. As he reached for her, she twisted her body and headbutted him, making the commander stumble back. Darius quickly moved in and smashed the butt of his blaster against Zeltor's face. The commander collapsed, unconscious. Darius smirked. That felt good. Veyara held out her hands. Get these restraints off me. Darius used his knife to cut the energy cuffs. As soon as her hands were free, Veyara grabbed a fallen guard's blaster and turned to Darius. Let's get out of here. The final escape. The transport ship was on fire, sparks flying from the control panels. We have to move. Darius shouted, leading the way back to the hangar. Outside, Cal's remaining mercenaries had gathered, weapons raised. Darius and Veyara stopped. This doesn't look good, Darius muttered. Veyara glanced around. Then she spotted something, a fuel tank nearby. An idea formed in her mind. Darius, shoot that fuel tank. Darius looked at her, then at the tank. He grinned. I like the way you think. He aimed his blaster and fired. Boom! A massive explosion tore through the hangar, sending Cal's mercenaries flying. In the chaos, Darius grabbed Veyara's hand. Run. They sprinted back toward the iron vow, dodging falling debris. As they reached the ramp, Veyara turned back for one last look. Cal's hangar was in flames. Zeltor was defeated. The bounty hunters were scattered. She smiled. They had won. A new beginning. As the iron vow soared into space, leaving Velen 4 behind, Veyara sat beside Darius in the cockpit. She let out a breath. I still can't believe we made it out alive. Darius chuckled. You're getting good at this whole surviving thing, princess. She smirked. I had a good teacher. Darius glanced at her. So, what now? The Auxiliary Empire won't stop looking for you. Veyara thought for a moment. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his. We keep running, she said, but not just to survive. She looked into his eyes, determination shining in hers. We fight back. Darius grinned. Now that's the spirit. The iron vow disappeared into the stars. And for the first time in her life, Veyara wasn't running from her fate, she was chasing it.